Sega. Sega is... Sega, they failed. And honestly, I kind of wish they didn't. So, Sega, they're an interesting company. Sega is a games creator, manufacturer, company thing. They make games, and they used to make game consoles. However, they infamously, failed at that. After the Dreamcast in 2001, they stopped making any sort of consoles, and, they still made games, and they still do make games to this day. Some of them are good, but they're mainly not very good. And, obviously, they don't make any consoles anymore. However, honestly, as a Nintendo fan, I kinda wish they still were. And this is not because I am a Sega fanboy. This isn't because I want Sonic games or a Sega console now. It's because I think it would have made Nintendo games cheaper. No, genuinely, this is my reasoning. So let me tell you why I think Sega not failing would make Nintendo games not as expensive as they are. So Sega would have acted, in my opinion, if they didn't fail, as what I would like to call Nintendo's Microsoft. Why would I want to call them that? Well, Sony, for the past, 3-4 generations, has had to deal with Microsoft being a little bit of a thorn in their side. And Microsoft, they've only once ever even come close to overtaking Sony in terms of sales, and it was during the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, as to which Sony just barely won that generation, as to which you might be thinking, how the hell I thought Xbox 360 was the one that won that generation, and you'd be right, I also thought that too. However, Sony won that generation. However, Microsoft has still acted as sort of a little bit of a weight on Sony's ankle. They forced Sony to be a lot smarter and a little bit more consumer-friendly with their decisions. They can't just make something for an absolutely extortionate price, or otherwise nobody will buy it. They learned that with the PS3 and eventually cheapened it until it could beat the Xbox 360, and, now that Xbox is kind of failing, we're seeing them go back to what they tried with the PS3, but now they're doing with the PS5, and it's working this time because, Xbox is dying. However, for those couple of generations that it wasn't, they acted as enough of a thorn in Sony's side that they couldn't just make something for, an extortionate amount of money. They had to be somewhat smart with their decisions, which is something that I kind of wish happened to Nintendo with Sega. And this is what I mean by saying Sega would have been Nintendo's Microsoft. They would have acted as that thorn in Nintendo's side that forces Nintendo to think a little bit smarter, not make games ludicrously high prices, actually make their consoles a little bit better maybe. Sega would have been willing, I believe, if they continued to actually make consoles, they would have been more than willing to compete directly with Nintendo for the casual market. Why do I believe this? Well, because Sega was realistically directly competing with Nintendo. Now, there's always a chance if Sega survived, they would have tried to compete with Sony or with Microsoft, but I highly doubt it. I think they would have been much more willing to compete with Nintendo because, Nintendo was their original competitor and, the casual market might be easier for them to break into. I get that Sega was originally supposed to be, the cool kids console, but realistically, they're never going to beat out Sony or Microsoft in terms of getting an older, more purely gaming-focused audience. They'd always be better at capturing a slightly more casual audience, though not quite as casual as Nintendo's, which could make for a little bit of an interesting dynamic, I think. I mean, when you think about it, Sega, to a certain extent, could actually kind of affect both Sony and Nintendo and Microsoft, by being just gaming driven enough to possibly get a couple people from Sony and Microsoft, and also being just casual enough to steal people from Nintendo. So that could be interesting. Realistically, if that were to happen, I think they'd only really be competing with Nintendo, to be fair though, as I've already said. They have no reason to compete with Sony or Microsoft. They weren't really ever going to beat either of them. They might as well just stuck with going after Nintendo. And again, I think they would have been more than willing to. Honestly, I could see if Sega actually was willing to, put in the work, and they actually did make it to the Wii, PS3, and Xbox 360 generation, I think they would have seen Nintendo make the Wii, or they would have known Nintendo was getting into the casual market with something like the DS, and I think they would have tried to break into it as well. I think Sega would have made a Wii competitor. And assuming that Sega is continuously not failing and doesn't just not fail for the Dreamcast and immediately fails the next generation, assuming they are continuously not failing, I think this could have been pretty bad for Nintendo. And this is on to why I think Sega existing today could have had Nintendo have, cheaper games. Because Sega would have acted as a competitor, Sega would have had to find something to be able to compete with Nintendo. And I think one of the many things they would have done is they would have made their games and consoles just ever so slightly cheaper. This would mean that, not everyone, but a decent amount of people will be willing to buy a Sega over a Nintendo console just because of the price. And it would force Nintendo to start thinking about maybe lowering their own prices for their own consoles and their own games so they can compete with Sega's prices. So it would force both of them, to be honest, to continuously lower their prices until they can just about get by with them while still making a profit and actually being able to compete in the market. This would also probably force both of them to be even more innovative than they likely would have been, or Nintendo at least is. It would have forced them to come up with new ideas to be able to compete with each other. And I think the ideas for something like the Switch for Nintendo might have actually come around a little bit earlier. Hell, the Wii U might not even exist in this alternate timeline. It might be straight to the Switch because they have to compete with Sega somehow, and a portable home console is something that is very hard to compete with. Would Sega do the same thing and make their own portable home console? I have literally no idea, but I think there would be a chance in that case. Now, realistically, this is all just speculation, and I have actually no idea what would happen. But I think it's fun to think about, and that's just kind of why I wish Sega didn't die. Nintendo prices just would have been a whole lot cheaper. But pretty much it. Yeah, this is a bit of a shorter video than, the last few, but I had to get one out, and I, just didn't have a video to make for today. I know what the next one's gonna be. I think you might like it. Might be a bit of a hot take, but you might like it. So I know what the next video is gonna be, and maybe the video after that and stuff. But yeah, so the final verdict. Being a Sega fan is honestly just the saddest thing ever. Like, you just have nothing anymore, do you?